Hello everyone and welcome to episode 47 of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined in conversation by Shubber, CEO of Garden for Wildlife by the National Wildlife Federation in the USA. Restoring native habitat is one of the greatest tools we have to help to reverse the biodiversity crisis in our world. Your native plants, often those sadly known as weeds, have co-evolved alongside the pollinators, insects, songbirds and wildlife in your ecosystem. They are the ones that will not only attract pollinators but actually allow them to complete their life cycles by being food for the caterpillars and adolescent forms, which are a vital link in the chain to a thriving world. Unfortunately, knowing which plants are native to your region, finding those suitable for your garden conditions and then being able to actually source them can be a challenge that quickly prevents many well-intentioned gardeners being able to be part of this powerful solution. This was the challenge Shubber himself faced, having been inspired by Douglas Tallamy's book Nature's Best Hope, a new approach to conservation that starts in your yard. What unfolded is an incredible e-commerce business that harnessed the decades of knowledge and information Garden for Wildlife and the National Wildlife Federation already had, but now allows gardeners across most of the USA to simply enter their zip code and find exactly what plants are native to them, and then order them and have them delivered to their door. As if this wasn't enough, built into the system is an incredible ripple effect. Every plant purchased means a native plant will also be planted in a community garden. And an incredible recently launched affiliate program is allowing non-profits in any sector to fundraise by having their supporters buy and plant native plants. This episode is packed full of so much wisdom. He encourages us all to avoid complacency and to start questioning the orthodoxies we encounter in every aspect of our lives, to ensure that we regularly step back and ask, what's the real problem we need to solve, rather than falling into the common trap of creating solutions to the symptoms rather than the cause of the problem. He's incredibly passionate about making it easy for people to have an impact, and is a beautiful reminder that business done well can be an incredible vehicle for positive change. I hope you will be as inspired by this conversation as I was, and if you take up the Just One Plant Challenge, please share your pictures with me on social media, as I would love to see all of your beautiful weeds taking over the world. Welcome, Shubber, and thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, as you've had a really fascinating life and you're involved with an incredibly fascinating project at the moment. But to get us started, I always just ask my guests to share a little bit about their nature story. So really that's just what nature's been as a part of your life, or how that relationship has maybe evolved. So if there's anything you'd like to share to get us started, would be lovely.
Yeah. So, and thank you, Fiona, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So it's kind of a multi-decadal arc is my nature story. So it started with, and it's funny now because I have twin 14-year-olds, a son and a daughter who are in scouts. And so I spend a lot of time camping with them, and I'm back out in nature a lot more. In fact, this past weekend, I was up camping and hiking with my son for 2 days with the troop, up in the woods in the rain. And it was lovely, waking up to bird song in a tent. But, 40 years ago, I was a scout myself. And that was probably my extent of my exposure to nature. I grew up in Southern California, which is a pretty asphalt freeway laden place, Los Angeles. And the only trees really are palm trees, and not a lot of variety. So when I moved to the East Coast for graduate school, where I ended up here in Washington, D.C., I was amazed by the seasons.
Yeah, quite a shock, I should imagine. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually I had a little rental house, and I dug a hole in the backyard and I planted a tomato plant, and
wow.
I had my first homegrown tomatoes, and it was astounding. I mean, just the flavor difference between that and what I thought a tomato was from the store.
Yeah.
And so then I started getting into gardening more and buying lots of just the things you buy at the regular garden center. Lots of pretty flowering annuals and things to make the house look nicer and the rest, and to help the bees and the butterflies, just kind of tangentially. Well, fast forward a few decades, and now moved back to Maryland from the Bay Area about 5 years, almost 5 years ago now, just before the pandemic started, and which I guess is how we mark time in this world today. It's
I
like
know, I know. It's like before COVID and after, isn't it?
exactly. Although there was never really a clear official end, it just kind of
Yeah,
petered out. It was like the last people to leave a party. So,
yeah, yeah.
um, but not the good kind of party. So the anyway. I I get here, and the house that we have now, of course, has a much bigger lawn.
Mm.
We have almost 2 acres of yard in front of our
Oh,
house. It's
wow,
all
incredible.
grass, right? Which,
Yeah.
of course, my first thought was, who's going to mow this? Because that's a lot of growth because it rains and it's you have the seasons and it grows very quickly here. And I talked to my real estate agent, and he said, well, you're going to have to hire a landscaper. And then I did the math, and I thought, this is ridiculous. You're going to be paying thousands of dollars a year just to cut grass that keeps
Yeah,
coming back, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
so I actually did the math and bought my own riding mower, and I started doing that. But I said, you know what? Let me change this into more of a garden that will attract again butterflies and bees. I've been a supporter of the National Wildlife Federation for decades, and so I knew a little bit about why pollinators were important. And and the more I could put in trees and shrubs and flowers and things like that, the less I would need to have to mow.
Yeah.
So
A win-win.
yeah, I mean, it was like it served a purpose. And so I thought, okay, well, just about that time, and this is late 2019, a book had come out by Professor Doug Tallamy from the National Wildlife. He was from the University of Delaware. He's an advisor to the National Wildlife Federation. And the book, he's written a number of books, but the most recent book he'd written was called Nature's Best Hope.
Okay.
And because I was on the email list from NWF, I found out about the book. So I thought, okay, let me read the book. So I buy the book and I read it. And it was like my entire perspective had shifted because
Yeah.
all of a sudden, everything I've done for the last 20 years in gardening, I was basically told you did the wrong thing. You were actually
Yeah.
hurting the environment, not helping.
Yeah.
And that's a very kind of disruptive moment because I thought I was doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so, and the simple, what did I do wrong is I was buying plants from the local garden center and putting them in the ground, these annuals, and they're all invasive species.
Yeah.
So this is where I discovered what a native plant was. I didn't even know what the term native plant was. And now I knew what a native plant was, why our biodiversity, our songbirds and our pollinators and the rest have been disappearing, and why that's really, really bad. And so that set me on a quest to go find native plants to put in my garden. And so that's kind of my journey was, a little bit of contact early on. Oh yeah, and then of course my kids are in scouts now, and so I've spent, as I joke, more time in the last 2 years in tents than I have in my entire life. But I love it. Right? It's actually, once you have all the right gear, camping is a lot of fun, and it's actually very relaxing. And it's more exposure to nature, which is very, very beneficial both mentally and physically.
Yeah, and you're in a beautiful area there. I should imagine there's some incredible places to go camping as well. So
Mm.
really, really lovely pastime to enjoy with your children and develop that passion in them as well for
Yeah,
the
exactly.
natural world. Yeah, I think what you said about native plants is really true. It's like, gardeners have this incredible resource, don't we, of like this land that's available that we can support wildlife. And I think so many people have good intentions. I mean, normally if you're a gardener, you're sort of connected to nature. You're talking to your plants, you're aware of the world around you, but it's this challenge of understanding this native plants, which is where you've really sort of stepped into, having had that journey yourself. And I know from my own experience, it is really hard, and it's hard work, and I think that creates quite a big barrier to entry to people, doesn't it? Is like they have good intentions, and then they're sort of like, well, what plants are native and
Yes.
where can I find them? And it just sort of snowballs from there, and then their good intentions perhaps fizzle out, and they just sort of go back to, whatever the garden centre has available that looks pretty.
Yes, and it's actually, that was the very core problem that we had to look at solving, which is kind of three to four steps in this journey, which is awareness, education, access, and then kind of engagement, like ongoing
Yeah.
engagement. So awareness is most people don't even know, although it's starting to get more mainstream press. You're starting to see articles
Yeah.
about it, about what is a native plant, right? It's like a plant's a plant, and as we know, it's not. Um, and then once you say, okay, now I understand why native plants are important because of the impact it's having on biodiversity.
Yeah.
What's native to me?
Yeah.
Right, which is the next barrier, right? Because everything's native somewhere, even those showy annuals that I see at the garden center that are from Japan or the Mediterranean or South America or Africa or what have you, or England even,
Yeah.
they're native to those places. So they are native plants. And so the question is, what's native to me? And then once I know what's native to me, well, how do I get it, right? Because most places don't carry them. And so either I have to go to out of the way nurseries or I have to, um, well, now you can use Garden for Wildlife, which is why this whole business was created in the first place, is to make it easy to solve that
Yeah.
second and third part of the problem. Is once people know about native and they Google it and they find us, it's all you do is you put in your postal code and it only shows you what's native to where you live. So you don't have to do any work. And then you just, fill your shopping cart, click buy, and it shows up on your doorstep. And and
It
that
can be
solves the
easier.
problem of making, I don't have to go to the shop, right? It just comes
Yeah.
to me. And then you dig a hole in the ground and stick it in. And this is one of the things I love about perennials. And a lot of people don't understand as well. There's another dimension to education, which is financial education. Because for 20 plus years that I've been gardening, almost 30 years now, I've been gardening with regular plants. Every year you go and buy them, and then you
Yeah.
have to, and I will admit in full honesty, I would go and I'd see all these pretty flowers and things that I'd buy to like dress up the garden, whatever else for the family house. I'd bring them home and then they would sit there in the tray for like a week because I was just like, oh God, I don't have time to dig these holes and do all this like fertilizing and mulching and all this stuff, right? And so they would sit there. And so your time is actually a very valuable, it's the most
Yeah.
valuable asset
Yeah.
and most because you can never get it back. And then the other one is the cost of a plant, right? So people look at annuals and go, oh, they're only, a few dollars, whereas a perennial is a few dollars more.
Yeah.
But perennials come back every year. And
Yeah.
so after 2 years, they're cost neutral, not including the fact you've saved the labor of going to the store again and
Yeah.
digging a hole,
Replanting. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then at the end of the season, you don't have to rip them out because they're not, dead annuals that are just taking up space and looking ugly. Um, it it's actually a very different approach to gardening, but it does, as we talked about before this show, it does teach you patience, which is also mentally really good for you, right? You have
Yeah.
to like be willing to like wait for it, and you see the first about 4 weeks ago, the first sprouts of the purple coneflowers and black-eyed Susans and others are starting to come back in the yard, and now they're a foot and a half tall, but up until the day they emerge from the ground, you're like, when are they coming out? When are they
Yeah.
coming?
Did they survive? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and also like when you first plant them, you quite often they don't do very much initially, do they? While they're getting established. So it's, you have that patience as well. You don't have
Yeah.
that sort of instant gratification of the showy annuals, and it's like you said, it's just it's a different approach and it's a different mindset, isn't it? And I think that's really so what we need in society is about just changing up the way we think and how we expect to be rewarded, and realizing that actually patience and these rewards are greater over time. um yeah.
It is. I think that in our so I often make the analogy because again, as you've seen from my background, I spent most of my career has actually been in big consulting software startups, not plants, right? So this is
Yeah.
very new for me in some respects, other than as a hobby of gardening. But what I've noticed over the last few decades is, really from when we first got the internet, which is only 30 years old, the web specifically, internet's been
Yeah.
around for much longer, but the web, and then mobile technology, which is, 17 years old, and then iPads and the rest, and you start the cloud and everything, you start accelerating what's happening. And I sometimes think that like we as a species are like us with technology is like 3-year-olds with power tools. Like we have no idea what we're doing. We are not ready for it, and we don't have the experience to handle it
Yeah.
well, And
Yeah.
so what it's doing is it's making people, and I see this all the time, and I have to actually actively condition myself not to do this, but you know, are always checking their phone. They're always looking for things like the latest, dopamine hits. I
Yeah.
gotta know what's going on, right? And that frenetic pace One is it's bad for your ability to concentrate and do deep thinking and do all the things that are important. And it's just slow down and
Yeah.
actually enjoy the life around you because you're always in a rush. Um, but it's actually proven, multitasking is proven to not be good for your brain and this hypertasking, and yet
Yeah.
we continue to do it. So
Yeah.
this is actually a great counterbalance to that.
Yeah, and I love that your background is completely different. I think we have to sort of touch on that because I think it's really important, and it's something that I really try and embrace is that, the situation we're in now with the environment, like we need everybody. We need everyone's unique skills and
Yep.
different, understandings and visions and I love that. And I love that's what you brought. You brought this incredible wealth of knowledge and experience, which on the surface, some people might, sort of go, well, that's not relevant. You're in aerospace and, and business, and now you're in conservation. Like, how do you marry those two up? But one of the things I was reading was actually it was really interesting because something that you tapped into the National Wildlife Federation and their Garden for Wildlife project had, because it had been in existence, like it's been around for a very, very long time,
51
hasn't it?
years.
Yeah, and was that they had this amazing database that you
Yep.
could tap into of like what was native, and but you have then brought your knowledge and expertise to actually just take this to a whole nother level and make it actually have this huge impact now that is, again, we were talking about barriers to entry and it has
Yep.
taken away so many of them, and I just love that. I love that sort of
Oh, thank you.
marriage.
Yeah, well, I have a great team of people who actually build this stuff. I say, what if we could do X? And then next thing I know, they've done it, right? Which is
Yeah.
pretty fantastic. Like last year, right after I came in to lead up Garden for Wildlife. So as you mentioned, it's a program that's been around 51 years. And after I moved here and had my, epiphany around native plants, I reached out to the National Wildlife Federation. I was at Accenture, it was a, global partner in innovation, and I said, I want to work on a pro bono project with you to solve my problem. But it's
Yeah.
also the problem of tens of millions of gardeners across
Yeah.
the US who collectively spend over $50 billion a year on plants, right? So it's a big market, hyper fragmented, and people aren't aware. But if you made it easy for them, I think you get a lot of people to do the right thing. And so that ended up doing a series of workshops, coming up with all ideas and the rest. And then the e-commerce platform was launched inside of NWF in late 2021. I was the very first customer. The plants that are in my yard right now are the ones that came from Garden for Wildlife, and they're doing fantastic. The and so I know about the impact, which I'll come back to. But then fast forward a year, and they asked me to come in and help them spin it out. I told them they need to spin it as a separate company because you can't really run a growing large e-commerce business inside a not-for-profit. They're not designed for that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're designed for mission and education and the things they do. And so it was spun out. As part of that was me coming in to take over as CEO. So I came in and did that. And like one of the first things that I talked to the team about and they implemented very quickly was this Yelp-like filtering. So everybody who knows Yelp, right, which is a pretty standard app for finding restaurants and things. If you say I want to go and have an Italian reasonably cheap meal, caters to vegetarians, it's open at lunchtime, and they do takeout.
Yeah.
You can filter for all of that on
Yeah. Yeah.
Yelp and only see those restaurants
Yeah.
after you get past the ads. And it's all
Yeah.
restaurants, right? And where they are relative to you. Well, so we built something very similar because it wasn't enough to just show you what's native to you. We have so many native plants, right? I mean, this is part of what people have to understand is the variety that nature provides of color, size, season of bloom, soil type, all the rest. Nature has all of those things
Yeah.
there. We just have been conditioned to think, oh, I need to go and get impatiens, or I need to go and get, hydrangeas, or I need to go and get
Yeah.
whatever the thing might be, right? Because those are and so we created a Yelp-like filtering system. So you can put in what season do you want them to bloom? How tall do you want them to be? What color do you want? What wildlife do you want it to support? I mean, all those kinds of things. How much sunlight does it get, right? And you can
Yeah.
filter for that, and it only shows you those plants because, as you mentioned, taking out the friction is the key to making it easy for customers to actually do the right thing, and
Yeah.
in whatever setting you're in.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
e-commerce, you have to take out the friction.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I think this is the thing that why having people like you getting involved in non-profits is so important, because I mean, non-profits I mean, they're amazing. They do incredible work, but it is a difficult industry to be in. And quite often they're lacking that real sort of business side knowledge. They're really passionate people. They've got a huge amount of knowledge, but they don't know how to deliver it in the way that a business-minded person can. And just like you said, taking out the friction, like using knowledge that they've already got, but making it so it's accessible to people is really important. And it's key, I think, at this time, in bringing them through and helping them actually create what they're capable of creating, really, isn't it?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I mean, and we could spend hours talking about this, but one of the things that I actually spent a lot of time my business life and my consulting life talking with clients about, and it's actually a book that I was halfway through writing it. I had a publisher, or I have a publisher, and the book's half finished. But then I got asked to take on this job, and so the book just went and sitting over here on the side now, and I keep looking at it going, yes, I'll get to you when I have a moment. But it's around this concept of orthodoxies, which is really just a fancy consulting word for that's how we do things here. And every organization has them. It's not unique to not-for-profits. For-profit companies have them all the time. Governments have them. My kid's school has them. Scouting has them. Everybody has them. It's just, one of those, once you first enter any new organization or setting, the first thing you notice is, why did they do that? Or why do they do it that way, or whatever else? And then usually within about 6 months, you become one of them. You get conditioned to that same thinking, and you stop noticing the differences.
Yeah.
But that questioning mindset allows you to look at things and say, but what if we did it differently? What if we challenge that assumption, right? Because there's no necessarily, sometimes orthodoxies exist for a reason, and they're perfectly valid, and they still are. Like, laws are a great reason why you shouldn't do something, or why you must do something, right? Regulations. But oftentimes, the reason no longer exists if it did exist at one point. And so what that does in the not-for-profit setting is oftentimes they get, like you said, focused on their mission and whatever else, and then they don't even look at different ways of solving problems. And I did a project with another not-for-profit that we've been supporters of for a long time, called Best Friends, which is a amazing animal rescue, and they're really focused on cats and dogs at this point in the U.S. About 6 or 7 years ago, their leader, Julie Castle, had said, we can't save everything, so we're going to focus on just cats and dogs, because at that point in the U.S., about 3 million cats and dogs were being euthanized every year for lack of homes and places for them to go. And they set a goal that by 2025, they would save them all, that the U.S. would become a no-kill country in terms of, like, shelters would stop euthanizing. And that's a hugely ambitious goal, right? But they're down to the hundreds of thousands now.
Wow.
Because they systematically started targeting, like, okay, how do we fix the problems in shelters today? Well, where I came in was a few years ago. I did a pro bono project with them as well, focusing on specifically if you look at shelters, it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 1s are the big, massive shelters, the county shelters, all the rest. Very high intake, large staff, resources, et cetera. Tier 3 might be like a little kennel in some small rural town run by 2 people who basically do it, just as, like, that's
passion project almost.
Yeah, it's a passion project, or, it's the county pays them to do it, and they've got to take the animals, but they have no resources. They're very strapped. Well, they had a great program for helping the tier 1 shelters and even reaching into tier 2, but not a lot of resources, because, again, they're still a not-for-profit and they're stretched to what they do. But they would never achieve their goal if they couldn't find a way to hit tier 3 as well. And so what we said was, what if we thought differently about what a resource is? And so specifically, what I've been thinking about for decades now is that if you think about, I don't know if you've ever participated in a bikeathon or a walkathon or a jogathon, or any of these types of things, right? I've always been fascinated by the concept, because to me, it seems like the biggest waste of resource you could ever imagine, because you're taking a bunch of often very skilled people who could have anything from marketing to finance to, supply chain to whatever their skills are. And you're getting people to pay them to walk in a straight line, and they get a t-shirt at the end of it, right? Right. And it's a fundraiser. And I get that. But what if you could take that 3 hours that they were spending and actually apply it to the needs of the business
Yeah.
at scale? What would that
Yeah.
look like, right? It's
Yeah.
almost like a task rabbit, but with, okay, I've got 3,000 people in this walkathon who are actually marketing experts. What if I could have them for 3 hours collectively just
Yeah.
create the
Wow.
most amazing marketing campaigns all the rest for the
Like a
company?
brain trust, basically.
The
Of
brain trust,
yeah.
exactly, for
Yeah.
a really focused period of time. And
Yeah.
so we took that idea and expanded it and said, Best Friends has supporters and donors all across the country. And if you overlay that map with where the tier 3 shelters are, you could reach out to those people and say, what if we gave you free training on some aspect of shelter like management that you could go and train the local shelter? You would do something more than just giving us a check. You would actually be helping. And it was a way to engage volunteers and help the shelters. And they launched that program, and it's been very successful, right?
Wow.
The point being this, and sorry for that little tangent, but it's this idea of stepping back and saying, what's the problem I need to actually solve?
Yeah.
Which oftentimes people don't realize what the real problem is. They solve symptoms,
Yeah.
not the root cause.
Yeah.
When you get to the root cause, you identify that like there are things you can do that have a huge impact downstream. It's almost like Archimedes and the lever. If you do it upstream far enough, you can have like a little impact here, has a massive impact over here.
Yeah, no, I love that. There was a conservationist who sadly has passed away now. I think his name was Rory Young, and I listened to an interview with him quite a long time ago, and he had something very similar. He was going into a conservation area in Africa and had these sort of preconceived ideas of what the problem was. There was poaching, and people were obviously poaching for food, and but actually he went in and he said to the local communities like, why are you poaching? And the answer was the fact that they didn't have access to money. And it was like, he was like, I wouldn't have come up with that in a million years. And so from that, he went and sort of worked with like the mobile banking apps and things so that the people could could access their money. And he was like, it was if I'd come in with my preconceived ideas
Yep.
of why people were poaching, and obviously that had the impact on the wildlife there, I wouldn't have ever thought that that was what the problem I needed to solve. And I think that sort of really tallies with what you've said there is just this, actually asking the questions and sort of, having that you called it orthodoxy, didn't you? And having
Yep.
that every now and then having this sort of like, oh, let's all take a step back and just ask, well, does this still serve us? Like, are we still sort of heading in the right direction, or have we just, got in our rut and put our heads
Right.
down and carried on working?
And they exist everywhere, right? You think about when you make real big breakthroughs, it's not by incrementally improving on what you have. There's actually a business school professor years ago, Oren Harari, I think is his name, where he'd said, the light bulb was not invented through the continuous improvement of candles,
No.
right? It's required stepping back and saying, what problem I am actually trying to solve?
Yeah.
And really thinking deeply about that. And there's one of my favorite expressions I use, and I've used this in countless client workshops, was if you have an hour to solve a problem, spend 55 minutes defining the problem and
Yeah.
5 minutes solving it. Because once you really understand the problem, the answer is usually very obvious,
Yeah.
but it's not obvious before that. And
Yeah.
some of the best innovations you see out there, that my first reaction was always kind of like, duh, because it seems so obvious in retrospect.
Yeah. Yeah.
But until you see it, it could be right there next to you. You don't even know it's there.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I just think it has so many ramifications for every aspect of society at this point where we're really having to like we need people to help us have basically, I guess, unorthodox, would that be the right
Yep.
terminology for it?
Yep.
Unorthodox conversations, even, to just actually sit there and go, we're not gonna find the answers by asking the same questions. So we need
Yep.
to start asking different questions and
Right. And much smarter people than I have had that observation many, many years ago. I mean, Einstein said, you can't get to the solution with the same kind of thinking that created the problem,
yeah,
right? And that's actually where, coming back to the nature side, there's so much, especially in this post-pandemic world, that we're seeing now about people's mental health and physical health and the
mm,
challenges that people are having. And it's actually scientifically proven. Things that like I like to say the philosophers figured this out over the last few thousand years. Um, the scientists figured this out over the last few decades, and hopefully now the policy people are finally starting to figure it
Yeah.
out, which is the impact and value of nature and exposure to nature on your mental and physical well-being.
Yeah.
It's really well documented, right? There was actually a great book that came out a few years ago. I'm just looking at my shelf and I don't see it here, but it's called The Nature Fix.
Okay.
And if you haven't read it, and if your listeners haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Um, it's a fascinating book because it goes into, in fact, oh, sorry, it's right here next to me, buried in my desk under piles of stuff. But yeah, so Lawrence Williams, The Nature Fix. It's why nature makes us happier, healthier, and more creative.
Yeah.
And it actually goes through the science. Like, it starts with, I think, one of the first chapters, she goes to Japan, where the forest bathers are, right? And it's a highly urbanized environment in
Yeah.
Japan. But these people regularly go up to the mountains and go and take walks in the deep forest. And the scientists measured their blood pressure, cortisol levels, a whole range of things, not just right after they were hiking, but up to a month later. There were physical changes in their body that were positive
Yeah.
from doing this exposure, right? I know just personally on an anecdotal level, I have on my back porch here, we're surrounded now by all these native plants I put in and some woods. The number of different species of birds that have come back to
Mm.
my yard that weren't here when we moved in 5 years ago is like 3x that are now
Yeah.
here.
I
And and I know because I actually have documentation because I have the Merlin bird app from the Cornell
Oh
lab.
yeah, that's fantastic. We
And
love that app. It's
yeah,
great.
I tell people it's Shazam for birds,
Yeah.
which if you're listening to Shazam, it's like, as you click it and and they're actually a partner of ours, the Cornell lab
Oh,
for
okay.
wildlife. Yeah, we actually helped them with the Great Backyard Bird Count
Oh,
back in February.
oh,
And
fantastic.
yeah, we're actually working on for next year's plan now. But it's it's um it's one of the things I tell people. I actually I had the privilege of working with a group of students last spring, so a year ago at American University. A friend of mine is one of I think he's the dean over there at the business school, and he had said that a teacher who teaches a senior class for undergraduate business students needed real companies to focus on for their semester-long project.
Okay.
And it turns out when I talked with him, he's also a gardener and loves native plants. And so he's like, we'll make sure the Garden for Wildlife's one of the companies. So we were in there. We had 3 sections, so about 15 teams, about 50 students working on Garden for Wildlife for the
Oh
entire
wow.
semester. Got lots of great ideas, some of which we're now implementing.
Wow.
But what was most interesting to me was kind of the mindset of the Gen Z students,
Yeah.
right? They called themselves Generation Dread. And because all they've been told and fed is a steady diet of how terrible the world is now, whether it's
Oh, I know.
the carbon in the atmosphere, the plastic in the Pacific, the pesticides, the droughts, wars, multiple wars. You've got, just one thing after another, none of which they can do anything about. So,
Yeah.
why they really like Garden for Wildlife was, you take the climate change. You can drive an electric vehicle. I do. I don't see any difference in the atmosphere,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
don't see, I mean, I
Yeah.
know I'm not
Yeah.
stopping for petrol, right? But you
Yeah.
can use a metal straw like we have at home or
Yeah.
reusable shopping bags, but you don't see a change in the Pacific and the just
Yeah.
sheer amount of plastic that's out there, right?
Yeah.
So every one of these big things, you can do the right thing and you should, but you won't see the impact.
Yeah.
But you put native plants in your garden,
You see it.
and it doesn't matter if it's just a couple of container pots or if it's like you
Yeah.
take a 4 by 6 foot section, or if you do like I'm doing and slowly terraforming my entire yard. But it's you will see a difference within a year, and it
Yeah.
only continues to magnify after that, right? That very first year after I put in those plants in the pond that I dug, 3 turtles moved in from out of the forest. Now every night, because it's spring, if you I actually should post this on LinkedIn. Uh, the pond is probably, I don't know, a few 100 meters from our house, but at night you would swear the frogs were in our room because it is so loud, but in a very musical, like this
Yeah.
symphony going on
Yeah.
of nature. And the birds, like every morning now I wake up and I listen to bird song for half an hour before
Yeah.
anybody else even gets up. And it's just you can see the impact immediately.
Yeah. I think well, there's a couple of things there. So part of actually why I started my podcast was because of that exact reason that we are just feeding this kind of dread culture and this like feeling of powerlessness and overwhelm, and I saw it in, younger people that I know, and I guess I sort of sit on the cusp. I'm a bit older than Gen Z. I definitely can't call myself a Gen Z, but I've sort of tapped into feeling and understanding that emotion, and sort of thinking, well, what future do we have? And not feel, not seeing anything being done at the sort of governmental level, and
Yep.
just feeling hopelessness. So that was kind of really why I started my journey, but with the podcast. But also, like, nature just is amazing at being able to rejuvenate itself, and it's incredible in such a short time, like how it can just bounce back and you can see like these tangible impacts. And I think that again feeds back into just the power of people's gardens. I mean, the US is much bigger than we are in the UK, but I know in the UK there's an amazing statistic that basically there's about 10 million acres is in basically domestic wheat gardens. You call them yards in
Yep.
America, and that's more land than we have in our national nature reserves. So
Yes.
we have this, like, this huge resource that is there, that if we can get people gardening in this way for wildlife, using native plants and species, getting rid of this lovely terminology of weeds. and, we,
Oh, yeah. Don't
and
even get me started on the term weed, which is just something you don't want in your yard,
yeah,
technically. But like so many of the best and beautiful flowers that we have, their names actually have weed in the name, like Joe Pye weed, frostweed, milkweed, right? And a sneeze weed, which doesn't make you sneeze. Um, and we actually have joked about starting a campaign to rename these plants
yeah,
because that's part of like the mental hurdle people have to get over. It's like, I don't want a weed in my yard. It's not a weed.
yeah.
It's
I know. I mean, I'm in some gardening groups on Facebook, and I think you guys have just started your own gardening group. So I'd encourage
yeah.
people. We're going to have all the links in the podcast show notes bit, so people can look you up. And I'd encourage people to head over to your Facebook group as well. But yeah, I'm in gardening groups and people are like, is this a weed? Like, whenever they want a plant identification, they're like, this has come up, is it a weed? And it's like, just ask for what it is. It's like, actually, it's probably a native species.
That's actually the question that should be asked is this native, not is this a weed? And if
Yeah,
the answer is no, then it is a weed
yeah,
because it's actually not supposed to be there.
yeah. Yeah, and which
But,
is unfortunately probably most of the plants we all plant as well. But I
well,
mean,
and that's actually, there's a danger in something you said a moment ago that I think it's a very fine edge, which is nature is incredibly resilient, right? I mean, the planet's been around much longer than we have as a species. And, if you look at one of those year-long geological clocks where they say the entire history of the Earth was like 1 year, we're like the last 20 seconds or
yeah,
something of
yeah,
the year. That's how short humanity's been here. And yet we've managed to do some pretty like amazing, but also really concerning things to the planet in a very short time. The danger is while nature is very resilient, and I'm seeing it in my yard with how fast, with a little bit of help, it can come back. There's a complacency that comes with that, which is, oh, well, somebody will fix this. Oh, well, science will take care of this. Oh, well. And that's exactly how we got where we are right now.
yeah,
Um, there's an orthodoxy that actually, and this I have to pin the blame on the English for this one, but um, when the as we refer to them, the founding fathers, I think you refer to them as the scoundrels who, seceded. But when they first set up the United States back in the 1700s, they aspired to have English style gardens, right? So you look at like
yeah,
Monticello from Jefferson,
yeah,
you look at Mount Vernon with Washington, and all the others out there, these big rolling estates with beautiful lawns. So they cut down all the trees and they rip out all the weeds and they put in these big lawns. And that became the orthodoxy for every home in America. So like I grew up in Southern
yeah,
California, very Brady Bunch style home, suburban tract housing. Every single house has this rectangular lawn in front of it that's
yeah,
about 10 feet by 30 feet. So like, what, 3 by 7 meters or 8 meters. Um, that serves absolutely no purpose because I grew up in a desert and yet everybody has a lawn. And
and
it's
all the
this
maintenance that
connection,
goes with that as well. That's the other thing. The
right? The
the
pesticides, but also
watering all
we
the
water
fossil
it.
fuels, and yeah,
Yeah, and the landscapers who come over, and almost nobody uses their lawns. Because they're just these little rectangles. And so, um, you said something earlier, which I think is also important, is that government can actually help with this, and they are helping. So what we've discovered is here in the US, there's about $1 billion in programs at county and city levels across the country. And there are different programs in each municipality, which makes it a bit of a patchwork. But to actually help subsidize you or pay you outright to do the right thing with your yard. So in my hometown of Long Beach, California, there's a program now where they will pay you $3 per square foot to remove your lawn and put
Oh,
in drought
wow.
tolerant plants.
Wow.
Why? Because it saves the city water, and the drought out in California
Yeah.
is real, even with the rainstorms that they just had. The drought is real and it's never going away. So getting people to get rid of their lawns and put in drought tolerant gardens that also help with the pollinators and the hummingbirds and all the other things like that, it's a win-win, and the
Yeah.
city pays for it. So it doesn't cost you as a homeowner or anything. Here where I live, I just got approved, and my CFO just got approved as well. Montgomery County has a program called Rainscapes. And because we have lots of rain out here in the DC area, the problem is with these big lawns, if you know any of your listeners know, as I'm sure you know, turf, the roots only go down like 4 to 6 inches, and then the ground is hard packed underneath it. It might as
Yeah.
well be a brick. And
Yeah.
so when it rains, that water all runs
Just
straight
runs
down
off.
to the storm drains
Yeah.
and out to the Chesapeake Bay. And the Chesapeake Bay is pretty polluted because of all the runoff, right? The chemicals
Yeah.
and the pesticides and everything else. And so the federal government has been trying to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. And so they've put restrictions on counties about how much runoff they can have and the rest. Well, again, root cause problem. The county looked at it and said, what's the easiest way to solve the runoff problem? Solve it at the source.
Yeah.
So get homeowners to put gardens in with native plants that have very deep roots, because native plant root systems go down as much as 15 feet,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
4 to 5 meters. And what that means is it opens up the ground. So when it rains, it's like a sponge and it absorbs the
Yeah.
water. Well, that's actually very good, because then the earth naturally filters the stuff before it gets to the Chesapeake, instead of it running straight to the storm drain and out. So I was just approved for, a grant from the county for $7,500 to put in a rain garden in my yard. So it'll be free to me. I don't do
Wow.
anything besides get the contractor, get the plants, and they will do all the work, and the county will reimburse me for every penny. The programs like that exist. We need more of them, and then we need
Yeah.
people to be aware of them, and then we need to make them frictionless so it's easy to sign up,
To actually
get
go
approved.
from oh, that sounds like a great idea, but how do I,
Right.
how do I
And
do it?
And again, these programs, a big part of it is awareness. Right? I go back to the
Yeah.
awareness, education, action, awareness, right? I just discovered completely by accident that Montgomery County also has a program called Tree Montgomery, where they will come and install native trees in
Oh,
your
wow.
yard for
Wow.
free. And I'm not talking about little like bare root trees or that kind of
Yeah.
thing. These are 10-foot tall trees
Wow.
that are already on their journey, right? And so they came in, and I've had 13 trees put in my lawn,
Wow.
red maple, sycamore, tulip trees, et cetera, an oak tree. And I, of course, now, again, the patience thing I have to watch, but in 5 or 6 years, these are going to be 20-foot tall trees, and, beautiful foliage in the fall, spring, but these are multi-thousand-dollar trees, and I got them for free, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot out there, a lot of great resources, a lot of great education. Um, and the first thing people have to do is just say, I can make a difference, even if it's one container. And I'm
Yeah.
going to just go and put a few things in, and I'm going to just watch and see what comes.
Yeah, I think there's so much there, and I think I mean, it's fantastic to hear of these incredible initiatives that you've got, and like you said, it's the challenges. I think overcoming the noise that we've become accustomed to, and then this comes back to the orthodox again, doesn't it? Of like we've become accustomed to this sort of negative dialogue that nothing's being done, and so we don't even know to ask the questions to find, that there are these opportunities really for people, and the grants mean that it's taking out that financial barrier to entry as
Yep.
well, which is another aspect of it for people. And yeah, that's really exciting to hear that there's so much going on. And I think that's what I'm trying to do is just kind of raise awareness for these amazing things that are out there that are there. It's like, it's not that I have to do anything, it's that I'm just trying to like help these faces like raise their voice, and then people can go who actually want to do something, because I think a lot of people do want to do something, they just are a bit lost in like knowing how to do it and things. And that's really what you're incredible at, is basically being this amazing facilitator to kind of basically open this up for people. And
Oh, you're too kind.
no, it's no, but it's a really important skill that I think is sometimes perhaps not people don't realize actually that's what they need, is actually just someone to sort of help put all the pieces together that were perhaps there, but they were just not aligned. And
Well, there's actually a really simple tool that I've used lots of people. It's easy to identify orthodoxies once you get used to using this tool, because then you'll see them everywhere around you. But before I get there, I was going to say one example of that again is, if someone says you can't do whatever, most people's initial reaction is just to accept that and move on, right?
yeah,
So for
yeah,
instance, we have, I don't know if you have something similar in the UK, but we have what's called an HOA here, a homeowners association, right? Whether
okay,
it's condominiums or townhomes or
yeah,
regular houses. And they can be very restrictive on, like, if you buy into a neighborhood and it has an HOA, you pay fees into the HOA, which covers things like, community landscaping and maybe
yeah,
sometimes there's a pool house, or whatever else. But they often have the restrictions on, for instance, what color you can paint your house, or what,
yeah, okay,
but also it turns out on your yards, and
yeah,
so, or gardens, right? And so this is an interesting one, because some people had started doing things like planting. Well, one was people who'd plant vegetables in their yard, because again, going back to almost 100 years ago, and we had these things called victory gardens during World War II, where people would actually grow food in their front
yeah,
yard, right? And so, which is a crazy concept. I've been doing it for forever, but this
yeah,
idea that you just take out a piece of your lawn and put in, a bed, and then grow
food,
vegetables for your own food, right?
yeah,
Like free food. And
yeah,
of course, now with inflation is actually more interesting, but then they would get sued.
yeah, okay,
Owners association say you can't do that. That violates our covenant, whatever else. Well, same thing happened with native plants. And actually, here in the state of Maryland, not too long ago, maybe a year ago, the Maryland Supreme Court ruled on the side of the homeowners to say that HOAs cannot prevent them from planting native plants in their
oh,
gardens, because they
fantastic,
had these conventions. Well, that
yeah,
opened the door to,
yeah,
people can do this, but it started with somebody saying, "I'm going to do this. I'm going to plant it." And when their association said you can't do it, they said, "Take me to court," because there was no basis for it, right?
yeah,
And oftentimes, when a new community is developed, they don't write the rules from scratch, right? What do? The next condo community or townhomes or regular houses, they go and copy another HOA's basic,
yeah,
rules, and say
yeah,
these are our rules now, right? Because who wants to do the work of writing a constitution from scratch? Nobody.
yeah, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
very
and they're
rare.
like, well, that worked for them,
Yeah, it's
so
like, what do
it'll
we need
work
in
for us.
bylaws?
Yeah,
Okay, so just use the same boilerplate and,
yeah,
change this here and, put the new address in, and okay, now we're done, right? Now we got our little community board and our HOA. Well, that just means that these rules or orthodoxies get propagated over and over and over again. But once you break them and you're supported by the courts that you can do that, well, guess what? Now everybody who wants to put native plants in their HOA can use that and start challenging rules. So you can challenge rules on anything if they
yeah,
don't make sense.
yeah.
That's how our system works, right? As opposed to just default, nod your head, say yes, okay, I guess I won't do that then, and move on, right?
Yeah, no, and I think it's realizing that we're evolving as well. It comes back to your comments about technology earlier, and the fact that, we're in this like rapidly evolving space, aren't we? And actually, there are so many tools there now that we have at our disposal, and it's also, that's important to be like, well, is there something that's now available that wasn't available 10 or 15 years ago that can actually help as well,
Yeah.
do a job? And I think that, I mean, that's part of like you're embracing the e-commerce side of it, really, haven't you, for the charity? And sort of 20 years ago that wouldn't have been potentially a possibility for them, but now it is a huge market, and it's something that has allowed them to take their sort of ideas and ideology about gardening for wildlife and bring it into the sort of modern time, and
Yep.
stay connected with that. And but it's incredible because I love the fact that you've looked at all levels of it. So you networked with scientists and naturalists, didn't you, to sort of make sure you were getting the best ideas of the right native plants and what animals and things that
Yeah,
they
we
supported.
use their science for all of that. So our expertise is really around building an e-commerce, and then now starting to do physical retail as well, business like interface to that
Yeah.
knowledge,
Yeah.
and then exposing and making it easy for people to access. And our biggest challenge right now is simply awareness of our existence, right?
Yeah.
Because for me, success is when everybody knows what a native plant is right off the bat, and then they choose to at least put some in their yard.
Yeah.
We're not purists. We will never sell anything that's not a true native plant.
Yeah.
Anyway, some people sell nativars or cultivars or whatever, which kind of again defeats the purpose. But um, I don't walk around and point at people's lawns and say you're bad because you have this or whatever in your yard, because it's a journey. Everybody's on a journey with everything, right? And it's like, well, where they get is good, but it's provide the education when they need it, the awareness when they need it, the information, and then the access.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also about a journey as well. Like, we're not asking people to go and rip up everything that they've got in their garden. It's like, start with what's manageable. If you've got a lawn, make a bit of a bed on one side that's native, and then, do it over time, do it in a way that's manageable. Because I think that's the other thing as well. These sometimes we get put off because it feels overwhelming, don't we, as well? And actually, I mean, you've said you've been where you are for like 5 years, and you're
Yep.
still doing things like
Oh my
it's
gosh.
not, it's not something you're going to do overnight. It's something that you start, and it's something that you can just do over time and
Yep.
enjoy doing over time as well.
It's one of the things about the journey is that it never ends, but you're not in a race, right? You just
Yeah.
take it each step as you're doing it, and then okay, this is how much I'm going to do this year, and then next year I might do a little bit more. And um, the nice thing is that the plants themselves are kind of set and forget. Once you put them in, uh, they don't look like they're doing much for that first year because they're growing roots, and then after that, you know,
They're
they're on
away.
their own, right? They keep coming back, but.
Yeah, and I think because you can also, if I remember correctly, you can do a certified wildlife habitat with the Garden for Wildlife as well, can't you?
Yes.
To basically say that, I guess, is it a bit sort of like pledging your space to say that you've kind of signed up to your principles and put them into practice?
Yeah, so it's actually a program that NWF started at the same time they started Garden for Wildlife back in 73. And a few years ago, they got to their 300,000th certified wildlife habitat in the US, which my house is now one. I have a sign out in the driveway that, designates that this house is certified habitat, which it's a self-certification, right? It's not like people come out with clipboards and check out your yard, but they have very specific criteria. And once you've completed all of those, then you can, you know, sign up and say my house is certified, and you can get a sign, which is a few dollars
Helps with
getting signs,
education
right?
as well and awareness, I guess, as well,
Right.
doesn't it?
And
Yeah.
what they found is actually that if somebody certifies, their neighbors are 60% more likely to then certify as well, right? So it
Oh,
becomes
wow.
kind of a propagating
Yeah.
event. But the criteria are really straightforward, and anybody can do this, which is, you're supposed to have two sources of food. So you can have like bird feeders, but also native plants that provide
Yeah.
seeds, etc. You need to have a source of water, which it could be a pond like I've dug, it could be a bird bath, any sort of like fountain, whatever.
Yeah.
It can be you need to have shelter, so shrubs, bushes, things that things can hide in,
Yeah.
and then a place to raise young, which again can be these natural places where they can build nests or birdhouses, etc. And then my daughter and I have built, I think we built 8 birdhouses for eastern bluebirds, which is a very specific kind of birdhouse that doesn't have a perch. It actually has grooves in the front, kind of like the bark of a
Ah,
tree,
okay. Yeah.
and you cut those into the wood, which was a neat skill to learn how to do that with a table saw. But we built those the very first day we put them up. Now, mind you, prior to that, I'd seen one eastern bluebird in the yard since we moved in. We built these birdhouses the very first day we put them up. No exaggeration. Every single birdhouse had a pair of bluebirds ready to move in.
Wow.
It was the wildest thing, and
Yeah.
it was fantastic, right? So, and I
Yeah.
love them, beautiful birds. But anyway, it's the last one is of course a place to raise young,
Yeah.
and that again comes back to the issue of why you need native plants and not just bird feeders, because I have probably 7 or 8 bird feeders on my back porch. So it's a ritual, every couple of days I have to go and refill them all because they're very hungry birds out there. And now they've discovered the buffet.
Yeah.
They never leave. But bird feeders are not enough to restore the bird population because they can't feed their young from them, because
Yeah.
it's like giving a 6-month-old a steak. You can't do it. They don't know
Yeah.
how to eat it, and they don't have the ability to process it. What they need are soft proteins, which is what I learned from reading Doug's book. And just a trivia question for your listeners, and for you as well, if you don't know the answer to this, is if you take a single nest of chickadees, which, maybe 5 little baby birds when they're born, and they're in the nest only for a short number of weeks before they matured and fly off. If you take a nest of chickadees from the time they hatch to the time they leave the nest, how many caterpillars do you think one nest of 5 baby birds eats?
It's well, it would be tens of thousands, I would guess.
That's actually, you're the first person who's guessed above the number. Nobody's ever. So that's, congratulations. You're closer, but haven't gone over. It's between 6 and 9,000
Wow,
caterpillars,
okay.
right? Okay. Most people tend to guess like, oh, 50, 100, a few hundred. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
they are eating voraciously, right? That's how they grow so fast.
Yeah.
But the caterpillars are the offspring of the moths and the butterflies.
Yeah.
So when you get rid of the native plants that support the moths and the butterflies, you get rid of the offspring, which is why the monarch has become such a iconic disappearing pollinator symbol in the U.S. We saved the monarch because milkweed. We ripped out the milkweed. It used to be all over this country.
Yeah.
Systematically ripped it out, and now we're trying to replant it because it's the only thing they can eat.
Yeah.
But those caterpillars that come from all these different species of butterflies and moths are the primary food source, not worms, which is where our conversation started so long earlier this morning, is that they need those to feed their young.
Yeah.
You wipe out the native plants, you wipe out the pollinators, you wipe out the pollinators, you wipe out the birds. It's really a simple link.
Yeah.
And once I discovered that reading the book, that's what changed my life.
Yeah, I think this is the thing, isn't it? It's simple, but it's not easy to change that mindset. And I think maybe we should just touch on like the reason that native plants are so important is because they have co-evolved with
Right.
the insects and in pollinators and the birds in your area, which is why finding the native plants that are specific for your area. And I mean, we have regional variations in the UK, but probably not anywhere near to the extreme that you guys have got in the States, just because of your scale and size. And you've got prairies and deserts and and rainforests and everything in between. And that's the challenge, isn't it? Which is what is the power of basically the product that you've put together, is that people can go and they can put in their zip code, and it will basically say, okay, you're in this area. This is the pollinators, the bees, the birds and insects that you will have, and these are the species of plant that will support them. And then you're basically
Exactly
helping to restore the ecosystem of your area to what it needs to be for everything to thrive.
Well, and this is the other piece of the puzzle that I think people need to understand. It's like, there's and somewhat in podcasts like this, and when I talk to nature groups, it's a bit of preaching to the choir, because there's already a certain amount of, I get it, and I want to do my part, right? We need to educate the broader population that actually still goes to the big garden centers and buys, I call them junk plants. And I actually recently started talking about this in the form of like, there's big oil and there's big tobacco. I believe there's also big garden, because there's an entire industry that is around branding and selling invasive species that are short-lived, right? Annuals that require lots of fertilizers and pesticides, which are bad for the environment.
Yeah.
All these things, and people buy them thinking that they're doing the right thing. It'd be like, people buying lots of junk food for their kids and think they're feeding a good diet. We need to break that orthodoxy and that mindset. And the best way to do it is through education, not through like naming and shaming, but to say, look, here's why it matters. Here's what is important. But the other piece that there's a photo that I saw recently that really kind of makes a stark picture of this. I'm sure there's probably an equivalent in the UK as well at a Tesco's, but this was at a Whole Foods in the US, where they took a before and after photo of the produce section, and they showed all the produce they sell, and then they showed it again with only the produce they sell that wasn't enabled by pollinators.
Oh, wow.
And like
Okay.
80% of it's gone, right?
Yeah.
And here's why it's important is, 1 in 3 bites that the average person eats is created by a pollinator.
Yeah.
So if you say, okay, well, what happens if the pollinators disappear? When I was a kid, so again, I'm a bit older. When I was a kid and we, drive around my parents' station wagon on family trips, every time you stopped at the gas station, you would have to clean the windshield because it was
Yeah.
covered in bug splatter,
Yeah.
right? I drive from here to New York, which is about a 4.5, 5 hour drive, just to give you a sense of scale, and on the highway, and there is virtually not a single mark
Yeah.
on the windshield. And it's not because my car is very aerodynamic versus my parents. It's because there are a lot less bugs in the air. And that should terrify people
Yeah.
because our food depends on it. E.O. Wilson, the professor from Harvard, who's also sadly passed away, probably one of the preeminent writers on biodiversity, insects and the rest. He had a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase here, where he said, if humans disappeared, you know, in 10,000 years, you wouldn't even know we were here, right? Nature would just recover the planet and move on, right? You can see, look at an abandoned building after 50 years, it's covered in vines already, and it's
Yeah.
been.
Yeah.
He said, but if insects disappeared in 100 years, we'd all be screwed
Yeah.
because we rely on them to survive.
Yeah.
And so putting in some native plants into those things is a small thing to do to help ourselves
Yeah.
on so many levels.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's almost, it sounds like a lovely kind of place to look to wrap up actually, because that's the thing, isn't it? It is, I mean, well, nature is multifaceted, multi-level, interconnected, and it's the same with gardening, is that, it's you're you're helping yourself with your physical and mental well-being. You're, helping your neighbors as well with, having this, a nicer environment for all of us. But also we're helping nature as well recover, and help with this biodiversity crisis that we've had, which, is kind of, we know what's causing it, and this is one of the ways that we can help redress the balance and bring it back. And I just, yeah, it's just been fantastic talking to you. There's just so many things that I think we've covered, and just is really like getting people to think differently, I think is a really powerful thing as well. And questioning the orthodoxies in your life and in everything that you come across, and actually that can make us more empowered, I think, as well, and able to, make little shifts. It doesn't have to be big shifts, does it? I think
Yep.
sometimes that's the thing that we forget. Sometimes we think we have to change the world, and we forget that actually that can start with just something quite small, and it has a big impact. But I don't know if
Indeed.
there's anything you'd like to leave us with, any thoughts that you'd like to just leave with people to get them thinking differently, or
Well, it's actually, so first off, thank you for the time, and thank you to the listeners for taking your time to listen to this if you got this far, because it is, as I said earlier, the only resource we have of value is our own time. And so I would say we're running a challenge right now, actually, Homegrown National Park, which is a not-for-profit that was started as a result of Doug's book, and we're partnered with now, has a challenge going that we're supporting that they're doing. And I pass this challenge on to your own listeners, which is just one plant, right? Just
yeah,
put one native plant in your yard. It's it's a start. They'll come back every year. You don't have to do anything to it. Doesn't even require, fertilizers or anything else because they're native. This is where they evolved to be. So
yeah,
they don't need help. They just need to be put in the ground. And then every year they will come back like clockwork. If everybody just did that one little thing, it would make a massive difference. And if you know people with a garden,
yeah,
give them one plant and have them put one in,
yeah.
right? Then you're creating corridors that the wildlife can move along.
Yeah, I love that, and I love the idea of gifting. And actually, that was something that we should have mentioned about your amazing um, project. Is actually for every plant that someone buys from you, you donate a plant to a community garden on project and space. And so they're doubling their impact as well, aren't they? By supporting you guys,
Yeah.
they're able
And
to
we
support
don't we
others.
don't literally do one for one because that would be very, very highly unmanageable. What we actually do is we basically accumulate a bunch of plants and then we go and do an installation. So our very first one was done just a little under a year ago. It was beginning of June last year in East Baltimore in what was uh used to be a row of townhomes have been ripped down. It was just a vacant lot. And there's now a huge pollinator garden. We donated 400 native plants, some shrubs and trees as well. And then 30 volunteers. I was there. Some of my staff was there, but then we had volunteers from local Amazon warehouse and some other groups, including a veterans group. And in just a few hours, we put in this amazing garden, which is coming back right now for the
Oh, wow.
first year because it spent all year building its roots. But then we've done last year, we did, I think, almost 90 of those. We 87 of those gardens last year. We're already doing them again this year.
Wow.
And it's the last thing I will leave actually is for not-for-profits. If any of your listeners are in the US, we launched a program for not-for-profits to help them fundraise by selling native plants, where all they do is they sign up with us. It takes less than a minute. They get a unique marketing link, which goes to our store. They send that to their
Oh,
supporters,
amazing.
and they get 15% of the
Oh,
revenue.
incredible.
So it's just an easy way to make money from people already gardening, but now you're getting that impact as well.
Oh,
When
wow.
they buy plants, again, we donate plants. So it's double the impact on the environment.
So this is a sort of an affiliate link for
It's
any
exactly what it is,
non-profit. So,
an
we were
affiliate link.
talking a little bit earlier about the dogs and cats, like they could that rescue charity could sign up and their
We actually have
supporters.
animal rescues signed up. We have PTAs, we have Rotary clubs, we have a large international not-for-profit. Homegrown National Park is signed up as a partner. So we have over 70. We launched the platform 3 months ago. We already have over
Wow.
70 affiliates.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness. Oh,
so
I
it,
just
it's
yeah.
super easy.
Oh, I love that. I've actually almost got goosebumps from that because I think this is the thing, isn't it? This is the power of people like you being in this space because you see these opportunities that perhaps other people wouldn't realize. And like, you've brought, I mean, the kind of core of what you're doing in its own right is huge, and the impact it can have is huge. Just getting people to plant natives, but actually, you've got this massive ripple that's now going out that is actually
Yep.
supporting other non-profits, whether they're in the environmental space or social spaces, helping people, and also, and by them getting help, they're sort of helping your own thing, and it's just incredible. And I think this is something that I love and I'm really passionate about is just the power of business. And when business is done well, like it can have this huge impact for positive change. And I think that's a dialogue that I'd like to see changing, a narrative that I'd like to see changing is we do have this kind of negative connotation about like big
Yep.
business, and actually it can be done in a way that just has this incredible ripple impact for good.
Yeah, and maybe we'll leave on that note then, which is that the businesses are just people.
Yeah.
That's the thing everybody forgets. Even the biggest corporations are still people. There's not like some nefarious thing called business running
Yeah.
or a room full of people smoking cigars going, we're going to destroy the world. But it's just people. And some of the easiest way to make a change is to change those individual people because
Yeah.
they have the ability to change the course of those corporations.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the message. So if you have people who are listeners who are also executives in their day lives, we did a program recently with Subaru
Yeah.
for Earth Day, and they gave gift cards to their employees to get native plants. Right,
Oh,
that
wow.
was their investment, right, as a starting point to something hopefully a lot bigger, where I could see, given their affiliation of their brand with the environment, imagine if everybody who bought a Subaru got a $50 gift card for native plants for their own yard.
Yeah.
They go online, get them, put them in their yard. That was
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
They sell 500,000 cars a year in the US.
Wow.
The impact on a just amount of habitat that would be created would be enormous.
Yeah.
This is this is the kind of business can do good things. All we have to do is help nudge them along, just like nature can fix itself if we nudge it along. It's
Yeah.
it's all the same kind of principle.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's perfect. And I love that way to end with that really like inspiring idea for people just to sit with and to question the orthodoxies and how they can become a little bit unorthodox. And and I know I'm going to take that away, and I'm going to I'm already a bit curious and I like to question things, but I'm going to start
Do that
looking
more.
even harder. So
Do that more. Yes.
yeah. And well, it's been an absolute pleasure. And like I said earlier, we'll have all of the links and things for people in the show notes so that they can find you, share you with their friends, and hopefully, this is over time going to become a massive movement that hopefully maybe can be replicated in other countries as well, and which would
Absolutely.
be, yeah.
That's part of the long-term plan because there's native plants everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, well, brilliant. Well, thank you. And yeah, maybe we'll catch up in a few years' time and see how far it's gone and how big you've grown and how many plants you've planted, because I think that's going to be the amazing
We
thing.
tell our customers to send us before and after photos. So before they start planting, take a picture, and then after, and then a year later, so you can see the progression. It is amazing when you see it like visually.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Fiona. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I truly hope this conversation has brought some hope and inspiration into your life. I would love to have these messages ripple out across the world. So if you can, please share this episode with your friends, leave a review on your favourite podcast player, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I would love to hear from you, so please feel free to connect with me on the links provided in the podcast description. But most importantly, thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. But don't forget to simply get out there and enjoy the natural world.